The next one's another one for Malcolm, another technical question. So the question is around thermal insulation. So the clerk of works on the site I am working on has indicated that the ring circuit cables installed under the thermal insulation in the attic space do not comply with IET wiring regulations 18th edition due to the amount of thermal insulation on top of the cables. So what do we do? Malcolm?
Folks, I'll try and make this fairly generic if that's okay, but most electricians here have installed a ring circuit at some time. It's fairly common. And generally across the board we use 2.5 cables. And a 2.5 cable can carry anything from about 12 amps to 23 amps, depending on how you install it. The regulations say the cable, if it's a 32 amp breaker, the cable should be able to carry at least 20 amps at any part of the ring. And if you look at the tables, and we're not going to do that tonight, but if you look at the tables, a cable, a 2.5 cable covered with thermal insulation for more than 100 mil is only capable of carrying 17 amps. So and again, we're not going to be too specific, but what the member had to do was go into the attic space in these particular houses and lift the cables to the top of the joist and pin them to the top of the joist where the thermal insulation had less effect. So a 2.5 cable up in an attic with 2 layers of insulation, according to the tables, can only carry 17 amps and it needs to carry 20 amps. And that will be a problem throughout Scotland. So the advice really, and the advice I tried to give to the member company was, when you install the cables, either make them free of thermal insulation, which is very difficult, or at least take it to the highest point of the joist, the top of the joist, because it is a problem. The government and the building legislation asks for as much thermal insulation as possible to keep the domestic property warm and stop hot air going up through the ceiling. The downside is the cable runs at a warmer temperature. Now, the cable's not going to go on fire. It's no threatening and anything like that, but the design parameters are that a 2.5 cable should be able to carry 20 amps, and depending on how you install it, it might only be able to carry 17 amps. Therefore, you wouldn't comply with the latest edition of the wiring regs. So that was the advice that I tried to give the member company. Take the cables to the top of the joist and you should be okay. Any thoughts on that one? Very difficult.
Alan Smith?
One of our electricians has come across this problem, and what he suggested that we do is, when we're doing the bedroom rings, we were wanting to do them, cover them with a 25 amp breaker rather than a 32. Is that sufficient, or is that still not enough, Malcolm?
I would say to you, on a 25 amp breaker, I'm not being smart, but that'll be very difficult to obtain, because usually it would be 20 or 32. But I believe you can, for some manufacturers got a 25 amp.
Hager do a 25, so that's why we went to them.
So if you get a 25 amp breaker, you're in the right direction. But remember then, the breaker should be of less current capacity than the cable. So you'd have a 25 amp breaker and a cable that can only carry 17 amps. So you're in the right direction, but I would still encourage you to keep the cables up.
Sorry, Malcolm. Even if it's done in a ring, is 25 still too much for that, do you feel?
The cable itself would only be able to carry 20 amps.
Right.
So you're in the right direction, Alan, but preferably you want the cables to be up to the top of the joist rather than underneath the 2 layers of insulation. But I know it's a problem, but I know one builder who puts a great big sarking board up in the attic space, and he runs the cable, gets the electrician to run the cable free of any thermal insulation. And that means it can carry, 23, 24 28 amps, but you've still to come through the insulation at some point, but then it would only be for a short distance rather than a long run. But beware, it's a difficult situation.
That was why he came to me to say about it. It wasn't like we run ours on a sarkin on the top of the joist, so there's only one bit of insulation on top of it. But it's the point where it comes down through 2 layers of insulation that was his concern.
If you're on the top and the vast majority of your run is only affected with 100 mil of thermal insulation, then the cable would carry more than 20 amps. So you're fine. You're okay.
Thank you.
Problem. Is that it for that one, folks? Okay, Sandra?
Thank you very much, Malcolm.